Hello again, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, where each week we bring you a new interview with one of Hollywood's top directors conducted by one of their peers. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/The Director's Cut. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Tom McCarthy's film, Spotlight. The film tells the true story of how a team of investigative reporters from the Boston Globe uncovered a massive scandal and decades-long cover-up of child molestation within the local Catholic Archdiocese. Mr. McCarthy received his first DGA Award nomination for Outstanding Directorial Achievement in Feature Film for his work on Spotlight, as well as an Academy Award nomination for Best Director. Following the Los Angeles screening of the film, Mr. McCarthy spoke with director Jonathan Levine about the challenges and joys of bringing Spotlight to the screen. Listen on for highlights from their conversation recorded at the DGA Theater. Enjoy.
Hi, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
First of all, congratulations on an amazing, amazing film.
Thank you.
Loved it. And I guess the first question would just be, what brought you to it, and how'd you end up wanting to tell this story?
It was actually one of the first projects that was brought to me. Most of the work up to this point I've self-generated, and I think I was editing Win-Win the first time I was approached with it, and it was just... It was some information was sent to me through two of the producers, Nicole Rockland and Bly Faust, and I just couldn't. It was too much. I couldn't consider it. It was kind of the first time I looked at material and thought, "Wow, this is really interesting and compelling." But I was kind of in the middle of the edit, and I couldn't give it my full attention, and I sort of reluctantly passed on it. And then, as fate would have it, a year later, they came back to me, and I was sort of had a little bit of space. And they flew to New York, and I sat down with them. And at that point, they had paired with Michael Sugar and Steve Golan at Anonymous, and just kind of presented the story to me, the sort of thumbnail version of Marty Baron arriving at the Globe. And I just kind of connected with it, and I thought this probably came back to me for a reason. I had a lot of kind of personal connection to the story. I lived in Boston. I went to school there. I was raised Catholic. I knew of the story. And I just found it really kind of compelling, and I said, look, I'll get involved. Let's try it in a new way. Let's go find a writer, because I was writing on another script then. And that was the beginning of the process. We did sort of an exhaustive search, and we found Josh Singer, who was just coming off the Fifth Estate. Josh and I hit it off, and I hired him. And then Josh was planning his first trip up to Boston, and I said, I'll go with you, because I would really want to meet these reporters in person for the first time. I'd only met Mike Resendez at that point, and Josh had sat with him also in L.A. And we took a train up to Boston and sat with the 6 people depicted in the film, the 4 reporters and the 2 editors. And we had such a great 4 or 5 days up there, kind of sitting with them a couple of times, and both individually and collectively. And by the end of that, I was just kind of hooked, and I called Josh and I said, hey, if you don't mind, I'm going to come back on as a full-time writer with you. I just was enjoying our, initial collaboration in the material, and then we were just kind of off and running.
And so how did you guys collaborate together? Would you split up scenes?
Yeah, it was a long time before we even got to the scene work, because there was so much research. There was no source material on this movie other than the reporting. So we had to conduct, hundreds of hours of interviews, not just with the reporters, but about everybody else you see depicted in the movie, and a lot of other people on the periphery of the story, former reporters, editors, publishers, lawyers, PR people in Boston, anyone we could talk to that would give us some texture and color on the culture of Boston at that time, not to mention the Globe. So we spent a good year and a half just doing that and slowly piecing together our outline based on those, conversations. Keep in mind, when we were doing this in 2012, most of the reporters had, it was 11, 12 years since their investigation. So we really had, in many cases, sort of triangulate the conversations and recreate the investigation and the steps of it as best we could.
It sounds kind of overwhelming at a certain point, right? I mean, you had so much information, I would imagine. How did you then narrow it into kind of a manageable 3-act film?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, but it was exciting. I mean, it was really almost an embarrassment of riches. I think once we kind of I sort of had decided early on and told Josh that I really wanted to kind of commit to the ensemble. I didn't want to conflate characters if we didn't have to, especially with the main characters. And I think early on I was committed to this idea of following the investigation through the team. So we would not just be following one or two protagonists, but six. And that was the kind of big thing that I think once we made that decision, and it sort of unleashed us. It unleashed Josh to kind of go and keep accumulating this information. And we just kept shaping till we had a really strong outline. And then the writing happened very quickly. We were very aggressive with that because we felt like all the pieces are in place. Now, keep in mind, we rewrote for another year and a half once we had a draft. But once we kind of cracked the back of the investigation and what we thought the main themes were, we kind of got over the hump, so to speak.
You mentioned the ensemble, which the cast is absolutely incredible in this movie. When did you start to think about actors? What was that process like, casting everyone?
Yeah, I always, once I'm really into writing, I start thinking of characters, or actors rather. I don't normally act until I have a really strong script, just because I don't like to reach out to actors unless I'm really convinced they are, and I feel like I can't do that until I really see the finished script and have a really good sense of the story. But once we did, many of the names we were bandying about, or I was kind of keeping a list of, and we went out to almost immediately. Mark Ruffalo was the first. I've known Mark for a long time. I've never worked with him, and I just sent him an email and a script, and then went through his agents also, and we kind of did that for a lot of these people. I've known them: John Slattery, Liev Schreiber, Stanley Tucci, Billy Crudup. There was a lot of people I was able just to reach out to and work that way, which makes it easier. Michael Keaton and Rachel McAdams, that kind of came out of our group discussion with me and my producers and Josh about who would be right. But really that cast fell together pretty quickly. For me, it was about building a cast that not only was right, but would understand and commit to what I was trying to develop directorially. And that's always a little trickier.
What is that? Is that meaning like being part of an ensemble rather than wanting to?
Yeah. Well, most of these guys carry movies, right. And they should. They're great actors, and it's kind of making sure everyone's on the same page. A lot of these guys come from the theater, I know, and that was one thing. But with some of the others, like Rachel and Michael, just being clear how we were approaching this movie, and to their credit, they were game from the beginning and brought a lot to it. One of my favorite things about watching this film again. Is watching all the action around the central bit of action and how dialed in these guys are. The listening that goes on in this movie is so active and so important to the storytelling, because I think it's probably what makes a great journalist is being a great listener. And I personally think it's what makes a great actor. I can tell an actor is truly engaged and committed when they're listening and when it becomes active. And some of my favorite scenes, that one scene where they get a call from Richard Sipe, and we just kind of pull back slowly, and they're just listening to that conversation, how dialed in they are, and they're sharing information on looks and eyebrows, which isn't really even in the script. They're just doing that based on where they are, their character is at that point of the story, and who they're connecting with, and that scene I think tells a lot of the story about how well these guys work together.
How do you like to work with actors? Did you rehearse it all? Did you, just talk through character and then do it on the day? What was the process like?
No, I'm a big believer in rehearsal. It was a little more difficult with this group because they're all great actors, and that means they're all working a lot, and they're tough sometimes to get into a rehearsal room. But we did for about a week in New York, and then more time in Boston and Toronto. And for me, it's just straight up table work. It's going through scenes. It's making sure we understand, look, there was so much information and backstory on every one of these investigative beats that I really had to make sure they understood exactly where we were in the story, both in terms of information and obviously emotionally. So it was a case of really kind of hammering through that. And then I use rehearsals a lot, not so much to get performance right, but to bring the actors up to speed, develop a language with them. And then I use it a lot as a kind of in terms of refining the writing. So I'm always sort of stripping away as I see what they're bringing to it, or adding if I think it need be.
There was also like a lot of great blocking in it. I don't imagine that happened in rehearsal. That probably happened when you got into the space. But you mentioned that the office was something you guys built in Toronto.
Yeah, we shot all the exteriors in Boston, and then we went up to Toronto and built that massive newsroom. Steve Carter, my wonderful production designer, built that, and worked closely with Masanobu Takinagi, my DP, and just trying to get the space right. We really wanted a live space. We didn't want to be in a studio. We wanted that depth. We wanted that natural light, and it took a long time to find it because these newsrooms are massive. The Globe, as you can see, the few times we depict it, and we did shoot in there quite a bit, it's like an ocean liner. It's absolutely enormous. And for me, visually, that was important because subtly I wanted the audience to know that this was a powerful institution, physically, visually, that was taking on another powerful institution, the Catholic Church. But we built that set, and we built the Spotlight office up in Toronto, so that almost became our studio work, which a lot of the movie takes place in there. And we found it, like I said, in this old abandoned Sears building on the kind of outskirts of Toronto, and just did a complete build in there. And it allowed us, once we got up there, we were able to move very, very quickly with those scenes and everything we shot up there.
Did you shoot one camera, two cameras?
We shot 2 cameras a fair amount of time, never more than 3. I think maybe at Fenway, that's the one time we had 3 cameras. We shot a live game. It was the first night of production. I don't ever recommend that. It was just ridiculous. It took us 9 innings to get a 1.5-page scene. And that was because people kept offering Mark Ruffalo a beer halfway through every scene. In fact, one guy offered a beer, and Mark said politely, because he's the nicest man on the planet, "No, it's okay. I'm drinking non-alcoholic." Not get out of the scene, but I'm drinking non-alcoholic. So, of course, 2 innings later, the guy came back with a non-alcoholic beer, which you can never be too nice. But we had to do it because it was the very end of the season, our first day of shooting. And the Red Sox were not having a good year, and they're not playing in the playoffs, and we had to get it done. So we had no choice, but it really threw us into the spirit of filming in Boston. I mean, you shoot Fenway, and you are all baptized, and it was pretty exciting. You could just kind of feel it. Other members of the cast were showing up just to kind of sit in the stands, and a bunch of the Spotlight team were there who were very involved in this whole process. I should say we never could have made this movie without their complete involvement every step of the way. So that was a pretty exciting way to start, and that was probably the one time I used 3 cameras.
If you're shooting a scene and it's not quite what you want it to be, either from a performance perspective, something feels wrong, how do you diagnose that? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is by the time I get to set, I understand the scene. I understand what it's about, and that leaves a little bit of room for rehearsal. Which I always start with an empty room and just my actors and DP, and we rehearse the scene and kind of allow them to block it and figure out what we need. I'll show it to the crew, and then Moss and I would probably refine it sometime visually and pick our shots. But, if I'm really stuck on a scene, it usually means I don't understand it. So we're missing an element of it. Something's not connecting. And I think by the time we got to set on Spotlight, I don't think we ever really had that problem. I think we really there was so much information to get through that we really had it broken down. And I think there were moments where, look, it's the great thing about collaborating, right? Suddenly you get to a live space and someone's going to get inspiration. Now, you can't do that all the time because you'll never make your day, but there's going to be things that will inform. And that was exciting to let happen. And, I'd never worked with Masa before. We had a very healthy prep for the film, and I think we were definitely on the same page. But even with him, sometimes it was great to he'd come with something new, a new idea, a new approach. And then it would just be a game time call.
Let's talk a little bit about your visual approach. How do you get on the same page with your DP? Do you watch movies? Do you have reference photography? What's the approach there?
I reference movies and, in some case, photographers, but I don't do that a lot. Really, I think we very quickly commit to working through the script together and kind of really talking about it and going through again and again and again till we develop a language that's consistent and realize where did we repeat, where aren't we being consistent, and trying to leave a little bit of room in there for our own interpretation, like I said, on the day and based on rehearsals. But I don't storyboard by and large. I've never really worked for me because of, I think, for me, it sort of precludes the rehearsal process to some degree. So, I think that is really the way. It's just sort of grinding it out and developing a language together. That said, there were, every film, there's a couple of moments where you kind of have to tack right. So Mas and he's a wonderful handheld photographer. He's beautiful with it. He's got a great sense of it. And we were trying to find where that fit in this film. And I remember we were talking about these different moments, and I was kind of pushing him gently to do it, and he was not feeling it, and we were kind of, in a good way, banging heads on it. And then the first day we walked into Spotlight, I walked in knowing exactly how we're going to shoot it, and he said, I think it should be handheld. And I was like, now you're telling me? And we cleared the set. We just sat there for like 15 minutes and talked about it, and he had kind of had this, as soon as he got on that set for the first time, had a reason why, and it was such a strong, specific reason to all the work we had done up to this point. It was an easy decision. So we basically stay handheld in the Spotlight until a certain moment in the investigation where we feel like they really emotionally land on the investigation, and then we go steady with it. And it was just, it was a great call. It was really subtle. He's so good at it, you almost can't pick it up. But it created this energy that we wanted, this kind of not quite fully visually committed to it. I think one thing that we talked about a lot in this movie was restraint of camera and style. And I think when you do that, you're riding a much finer line. Mas has shot a lot of other movies where the camera moves a lot, and I think we both felt with this, we had to really pick our moments, that we really wanted to hew as close to the style of the real reporter's lifestyle and workplace as possible. And that felt a very sort of unadorned approach visually, which is a fine line that we were walking.
I think it totally works. I mean, I felt the restraint, and I felt it creating tension, and I thought it worked wonderfully. It's a little scary though. You don't really have any bag of tricks to rely on, right? I mean, being restrained is definitely a challenge.
Yeah, it was. But keep in mind, we also had great actors. So I think, taking a page out of maybe Sidney Lumet's handbook and a few other great American directors specifically, we felt like we wanted to be very efficient and economical with our camera use and pick our moments. That we wanted to not feel like we were visually intruding in a way, but in sense we were witnessing and supporting these reporters, because ultimately we're seeing it through their eyes. And, that was the commitment we made. And that almost started at the script stage, but really it was in production that we, I think, found the visual kind of rhythm of the movie,
Well, it works really well because you never feel like you're being manipulated. I mean, people barely raise their voice a lot in this movie, and it is kind of very restrained, yet it shows kind of the mastery that they have and how incredible how incredible this investigation is. And I'm wondering just about the responsibility you felt to the real Spotlight team and to the victims of this, because obviously it's a very important story.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, when you work that closely with these people, and we spent so much time with them, not just the reporters, but we sat down with a number of the survivors depicted, Joe Crowley and Phil Saviano specifically, and they're very, very impressive people. And to hear their stories just once will have an impact on you that you'll never forget, to get a sense of how these men struggle with this today. And these are very strong-willed people who have committed their lives to making sure this doesn't happen again. So, but they do have an impact. And by the time we had gone into production, we were very close to these reporters. And, look, every movie you make, you want to get it right? You're trying to do the best job you can. There is an extra added burden of responsibility when you sort of feel a personal connection to the people and to the world. Someone said to me recently, well, look, you made a movie about reporters. You knew reporters were probably going to like it. And I said, yes, unless it wasn't accurate, in which case they would tear us to shreds, And I think these guys, look, we were probably talking to them for a year before we felt like they really opened up. Like it must be horrible to treat doctors. It's really horrible investigating reporters. They just didn't trust us, and they're used to asking the questions, not being asked. So we could just feel it, and they're very good at making you feel good about yourself, and then walking out of the room and being like, "They told us nothing," And Josh and I just kept feeling like we were amateur reporters getting played left, right, and center. But after about a year, they really started to open up, and the movie started to open up as a result. But that took a while. So yeah, you do feel that. But look, once we got even into production, we had a reporter on set just about every day, which informed everyone we were working with. Everyone was talking to them, not just me, my DP, my production designer, certainly Wendy Chuck, my brilliant costume designer. I mean, that look is so subtle and so absolutely spot on, and it's really tricky to do. But they were... Marty Barron, who's now running the Washington Post, I remember this so well. Steve Carter popped into my office and said, "Any chance I could reach out to Marty and just see if he'll maybe give me some insight into his office?" And so I said, "Yeah, here's his email. Go ahead." And with it, a half hour later, Steve had like a 2-page email from Marty telling, just describing his office in detail, what he had, including like a little stuffed pink pelican that someone gave him when he was leaving Miami. And that kind of cooperation was so instrumental to sort of the authenticity of the film,
How much were you interested in like showing journalism today through the lens of journalism sort of 15 years ago? I mean, how much of that kind of, to me, there's so much in this story about that. Not overtly, but I think it's very interesting.
Well, 2 comments on that. One, look, it's a period movie, but we never wanted the audience to be, I think Mas and I felt really strongly about this, as did the rest of my creative team, that you were conscious that you were watching it. Yes, there's certain tropes, certain wardrobe things and visual things and technology things and an AOL sign halfway through the film that we felt were important. But we never wanted to sort of overplay that. We wanted it to feel very relevant, very current. We wanted the audience to lose themselves in it. And I think we've felt collectively as a creative team, sometimes films overplay that because it's exciting and it's inviting. So that was the first thing. In terms of where we're at today, look, journalism's in a very different place than it was in 2001. I think most of us in this room know this, and it's a real travesty. It's an American tragedy, really, right? What's going on right now at CNN every day, and now, Ben Carson and others saying, you can't ask me questions about my history. It's like, I just saw some reporter on CNN flummoxed, like, so this means we can't vet stories anymore when they say something? And it's actually becoming almost a norm, which is terrifying, right? Because if they don't do it, who does it? Nobody does it, and we don't know who's telling the truth and who's lying. So we understood that. Josh and I did a lot of research on that. We didn't feel like we could really play it into the movie. The best we could do was show by example, a great example of high-level investigative journalism at a local paper, right? This isn't the New York Times, not to watch, but it's a local paper. It's Boston. This was a local story. And they had no idea when they were kind of diving in that this was going to, have national, international implications. They just didn't know it was that big. And that was actually another challenge, how to transport audiences back to a time before anyone knew this about the Catholic Church.
Right. That's what I was asking about, because I thought it was kind of common knowledge. But then when I heard that 50% of the clergy is sexually active, that's legit.
Yeah,
that's insane.
I think it's legit. Look, that's Richard Sipe, who we depict. Richard Jenkins plays his voice in the movie on the phone. Sipe was a guy that they suddenly started talking to, who turned out to be an expert on this on a whole new level, published numerous books. You can check out his stuff online if you're interested. But his findings, he was a priest. He studied this for 40 years now, most of his life, adult life. And they're pretty amazing what he talks about. And I think when he started talking to the Globe team, it just blew this thing open in a whole new way. Like, they suddenly started using words like crisis and phenomena. And at that point, no one knew it was that epic, it was that grand. So they were constantly kind of, when you talk to the reporters now, they were like, you just couldn't imagine seeing it this big. And there was a part of them that was, it was the brass ring, right? It was exciting as a journalist. That's what you're looking for, those big stories. But they lived in this town, and they cared about this town, and I think it was also horrific. It was incredibly troubling.
What's the current state of the Globe and the Spotlight team? I imagine the Globe circulation's way down.
Yeah, I think they've cut by about 20-30% of their staff. Look, around the country, all staffs have been cut. A lot of Metro dailies have been shuttered. Interestingly enough, because of Marty Baron and the legacy of this story, I think the Spotlight team is still intact, and they've actually increased it by 2 reporters. And that's not the norm right now around the country. So that's really exciting. And, I think once we had shown the movie to them and they signed off on it and were excited about it, we knew we had at least something close to the spirit of what we wanted to achieve with this movie, which was an authentic approach to reporting. Early on, I think I made the decision that there was something so interesting about the craft of investigation, and not just procedural, not just in that way, but just all the nuts and bolts, the kind of little things that these people do that are many times are so far from dramatic or thrilling, but rather they're just tedious. And they're the annoying things that they get paid money to do, because it's the only way to get to a result. And it was really, for Josh and I, we kind of nerded out on it, and then we thought, well, if this is interesting to us, we might be weird and have this fetish. But I'm betting if we capture it, it'll be interesting to the audience. And that was kind of one of the big gambles with the film.
Have you ever done this much research on a screenplay?
No, never. Never, not close. There was just too much information, and reading not only what happened within, but everything else around. And there was so much to kind of consume. I'll start with crediting Josh as being a wonderful partner who's got an ability to kind of digest information and break it down. But I felt that way about my entire creative team. Everyone was coming to the table and doing so much research. And reaching out to in the Globe, who was so amazingly cooperative in this. We kept going back there to film. A lot of the interiors we would shoot there and then connect it to our 1 or 2 sets in Toronto. But they just kept us full access. But as a result, we just were, kind of anything we could get. We're truckloads of stuff from Boston up to Toronto, and paint samples, anything you can imagine, we were kind of pulling from them. And I think collectively, we all just got so into it, getting as close as we could to the truth. And, you can kind of feel it in a film where the crew and the creative team just really kicks in and starts getting excited, and you're all just kind of high on that. And this was one of those projects. It was just so much to dig into. It was so rich,
Do you think the research, these interviews and stuff like that, did it feel similar? Did it feel like you were directing? Did it feel like this similar skill set? Or did it feel like you were almost a documentarian?
No, ultimately the skill set is similar, right? You're doing your job. Everything up to that point may be a little different, right? But ultimately you feel like you got a job to do. You got to understand the scene, understand visually how you're going to approach it, emotionally what you're trying to get to in terms of its singular truth. And then maybe the most challenging thing was we had a huge ensemble. I feel like I'm still casting this movie. It just kind of kept going and going and going and going, and it's very exciting, when you get deep into your bench and you got guys like Jamie Sheridan or Paul Guilfoyle and Neil Huff and coming in and just giving you great scenes. It's really just a cool way to work, and that was maybe one of the biggest tasks, but ultimately it's sort of getting everyone on the same page. You got guys like Michael Keaton, who have been doing movies for quite a long time, as you well know. And then you got guys like James LeBlanc, who plays Patrick McSorley, who we cast out of Boston, who's done a few bit parts in movies. He's a member of the sheet metal union in Southie. And how do we get those guys in a room together and make it feel seamless? That was the fun challenge of this one,
When you have someone who's not a Michael Keaton in a room opposite such an incredibly powerful ensemble, do you feel like you have to approach them differently? How do you pick them? Because for me, one of the most exceptional things about the movie is that every single performance is just spot on. And so when you have someone who is coming in for a day, how do you work with them and get them comfortable and get the performance out of them?
Well, usually I try to bring them in rehearsal if they have a key role. And I think the trick is treat everyone the same, right? You can't have a hierarchy, right? And most of these actors understand they're only as good as the people they're in the scene with. So there's got to be a generosity of spirit and trust on that set. And I think once you can feel that, when we shot that particular scene with Patrick McSorley and Stanley Tucci and Mark Ruffalo, when they were interviewing Patrick McSorley for the first time, we started on him, and it was just a call I made, and he kind of did it, and I just saw Stanley just looked at me like, whoa, and we're like, oh, this is going to be fun. And we felt that way a number of times. There's the one small scene where Robbie goes to interview the guy from Providence, That guy is from Providence. He's a dentist, and he's an actor. And he just came in. I didn't, I auditioned him. I thought he was good, but when that one scene, that one look he gets when he mentions they're there to talk about Father Talbot. I mean, that's difficult to do. It's really hard to walk on a set, one scene, one day, opposite Michael Keaton, and bring that in a way that seems to really fall in line with what everybody else is doing in the movie. But you really need the actors to help with that. But, some of that, of course, is my job.
And it's the environment you create on set, I think, is really important. What do you do to try to create like an on-set environment where people can be generous in that way? Is it just picking the right actors, or is it more than that?
That and great snacks, those help. No, I think it is. I think a big part of it is casting, getting that right, and then keeping a mood on set where we're there to work and we're there to do the best work and, take away all the other obstacles. Some of that can happen in rehearsal because you don't have a ton of time on set, but it's like you just got to put everyone in that mind where we're there to work and work quick. Look, when you have a movie like this, we didn't have that much money, so we don't have a lot of time. We've got to be very efficient when we get to set, and we can't spend a lot of time figuring things out. We've got to keep it moving. And I always try to set a tone with my crew early on that's how we're going to be working. And I think it sort of frees people up. It takes them out of their head in a lot of ways. And not just the actors, the rest of the key creative crew. It kind of gets us working in a very efficient way that still leaves a lot of room for creativity, because you're kind of on a set. You're always wrestling with those two things, right?
Talk a little bit about your relationship with time.
Did you say talk to me about time?
Yeah. So how many days did you have?
We had 45 days.
So a nice amount of time.
Felt pretty good.
But how often, during the day are you checking the clock? How often are you just talk about your relationship with time and how it informs how you approach a day directing?
I usually have a pretty good idea. Look, I talk to my DP and AD at the beginning of every day. I have a good idea what we have to do and where we have to be at. And sometimes you are ahead and sometimes you're behind. But normally I come from a school in the independent world where you're just getting everything you can and you're moving as quickly as you can and you have to make very strong choices. And I think Moss and I were very, there was never a scene where we're like, well, we have a little extra time. Let's just go get a little extra coverage. We're like, we don't need it. We got it in performance. We know what we came here to get and we moved on. And I think you can kind of feel it was a little bit rigorous, our approach that way, but you can kind of feel it in the film and it felt true to the work that the reporters were doing. I think in some weird sense, their approach to their work, which was so effective, totally informed our approach, which is this kind of blue collar, rigorous, unadorned approach to the work. That's what we were trying to capture. And I really think we took that as our cue. And then, in the edit room with Tom McCarthy, who I've made all my movies with, I think Tom had a really great sense of rhythm because look, with this movie, how we shot it and because of the amount of material, a lot of it became about pacing and how to maintain the tension where you don't really have a super active antagonist, right? The church is by design a very passive, although ever-present antagonist. But how do you maintain that tension where the audience knows where we're going and they don't see a bad guy? We didn't have, an albino priest with a cross in his head running around killing people. We just had churches everywhere. So it was how to maintain that without turning it into a thriller, because it's really not a thriller. It has some thrilling moments. It's a drama. That was probably one of the great, big, and fun challenges of this one.
Well, you did a beautiful job. It's beautifully directed. It's been an honor talking to you. And thank you guys so much.
Thank you all for sticking around. I appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed listening. You can watch a video of this and many other director Q&As on YouTube or on our website at dga.org/events. If you're enjoying the Director's Cut, please subscribe to it on iTunes or our SoundCloud page so you won't miss an episode. Over the next several weeks, we will have episodes covering several more Oscar-nominated films, so be sure to check those out as they arrive. We hope you hear from us soon. This podcast is brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.